In this section, we are going to explore the limiting forces of yourself so that you have greater clarity about what causes your self-state to sometimes not function as you would like it to. Up to this point, you already know that there is a nuclear self-state, which we are going to work on in the next section. But what I want you to observe here is that this self-state can be enlarged or smaller depending on certain factors. Your self-state can develop, evolve, or atrophy, stagnate, if you do not learn to control the limiting elements that may be affecting it. Think about what happens to people who develop some type of narcissism, which is a personality disorder. Here we speak of a super developed self-state, which is associated with survival complexes. Or you could also consider what happens to people who are too insecure. You can clearly notice that in a case like this, that person's self-state has somehow atrophied. In both cases, we speak of a process of imbalance of the self-state. Another effect that can alter your self-state is psychic contagion, which occurs in people who unknowingly acquire another person's self-state, and with it, all their associated pathologies. Something that happens a lot between family and friends. I am going to give you a very specific example on this topic. Have you noticed that there are people who, when they travel abroad, acquire, without being aware of it, the linguistic accent that the people who live in that place have? I had a friend who traveled to England and spent 2 weeks there, and when he returned, he arrived speaking with the same accent and tone of voice that they use in England. Well, the same thing happens with personalities or with the self-state. Sometimes you begin to imitate people without realizing it, and you become permeable to the diseases of the soul that those you imitate develop due to the living conditions they have experienced. But I don't want to delve into this topic. Let's look at some of the limitations that could be affecting your self-state. What I am going to show you here are childhood traumas, the influential people in your life, and authority beliefs. There are other components of the self, but here we are only going to focus on these three. So you already know that your core self-state begins to develop from the moment you are born. You know that you are different from others and that you have certain desires about what you want in your life. And above all, there are things that lead you to be happy. But what happens? At some moments in your childhood, that self-state begins to collide with various experiences that hurt you and cause that self-state, which was so yours, to cease to be yours, to become limited because of those experiences that I am talking to you here. That's why I pointed out that one of the limiting effects of your self-state is traumatic childhood experiences, which in most cases are not treated. The problem is that it is in childhood where your self-state is developing most strongly. But what happens? When you are a child, you are exposed to other children who unload their own states of insecurity on you. And on top of that, as if that were not enough, you have to deal with adults who have not gone through their psychological maturation process. Most of us experience this in our own family environment. What happens to you if you have parents who, in practice, are children from an emotional point of view? What happens if your siblings take it out on you due to the frustrations they face in the relationship they have with their parents? And also, what happens if your parents' siblings take out on you the frustrations they have in their interaction with the world? So, you were one way, but those experiences begin to alter your own nature, which, as you will see, is what causes most mental illnesses. That's why, on many occasions, you feel guilty for being who you are, with the consequence that this causes frustration in you, and with it, the physical discomfort of not being able to accept and live the type of life you want for yourself. An example of childhood trauma is that of a child who is beaten or treated cruelly by his parent or by his uncles or by his brothers, and who makes fun of him because he cries. This is a real case that I had to deal with, and it is a fairly common case. The majority of people who have suffered bullying or harassment in their relationships will remember that the person who abused them, in addition to hurting them from a physical point of view, made fun of them for express their emotions. Many cases of psychopathy arise precisely in children who, in their childhood, had to repress their emotions because the abuser they faced forced them not to complain or express what they felt, which, if you think about it, was totally naturally. Cry or complaining when you are hurt is the most obvious thing you can do when you are suffering. I only gave an example here, but I want you to observe how these childhood experiences, which you apparently outgrow as the years go by, caused your self state, which was supposed to develop in some way, to stop doing so and transform into another state of the self, in one that is not yours. Another limiter of your self state is the influential people in your life. The main ones are parents, but they could also be some teachers you had in your youth. Even now that you are an adult, you might be exposed to certain influencers in your professional environment. I want to clarify that these influential people become limiting when they force you to do what they want and do not allow you to develop as you would like. For example, if you have a parent who sees you as an extension of themselves, that parent could become a limiter of yourself, forcing you to behave the way they do, because you must be as he or she is and not as you are. And the third limitation that we are going to see here is that of authority beliefs, which occurs in people who stop believing in their own judgment and who see others as those who have power over them. I stop doing what I want because I necessarily have to follow a protocol. I have to ask others for permission if I want to achieve my life goals. A case of this type I had was that of a person who was forced to make decisions thinking about what his boss would do or not do. And that meant that even in his personal and family sphere, the one who made his life decisions was not himself, but rather it was his boss whom he consulted about everything. The problem is that at one point, his core self state began to manifest, and he went into depression because he no longer wanted to do his boss' bidding, and that in turn made him feel like a bad person. If you notice, A therapy for a case like this will always go hand in hand with the client being able to stop seeing the person who has so much influence on him as someone superior, so that he can see that everyone is his equal, which is what has somehow been altered. The idea here is that you can think about what the different factors have been throughout your life that have limited you from being who you really are. Here we are not going to go into detail, but I only want you to be aware that there are these limitations that throughout your life have prevented you from being who you really are, which is precisely the topic that we are going to discuss in the next section. We are going to focus on you being able to discover your core self state. I see you there.